Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes.
very much.
All right. Thank you so much. I would like to welcome you all to the launch of CPDE's Private Sector Watch Global Synthesis Report and Online Hub. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our global participants. Thank you so much for taking out a valuable time to join us in this event today. My name is Upakar, and I work as a project coordinator at Center for Good Governance and Peace, which is a nonprofit based in Nepal. I'm one of the members of CPDE's Private Sector Engagement Task Force, and also a contributor of a case study to the CPDE's Private Sector Watch. Now, before commencing the event formally, I would like to share some Zoom protocols with all of you. So please turn off your microphone when you're not speaking. Click the raise hand button for any kind of interventions. You may also use the chat box to interact with other participants or to reach out to the organizers. And we also have interpretations available in Spanish and French. So in order to hear your desired language, click the globe icon on the bottom of your Zoom app and click Spanish, French, or English as per your requirement. Also, please click mute other audio to avoid any audio interference. And for the translated presentations, click view options on the upper part of the screen and select the preferred language for the presentation. And at the end of the event, we'll be taking some really cool group photos. So for that, please turn on your videos so that we can see everybody's smiling faces and click a few pictures as well. All right, so let me begin with the introduction. The CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness CPDE Task Force on Private Sector Engagement was convened in May 2021 with the aim to facilitate the implementation of the Private Sector Watch Initiative and also represent CPDE in various engagements with regard to private sector monitoring. The Private Sector Engagement Task Force is led by the Reality of Aid Global Network and is composed of volunteer civil society organizations. In recent years, the private sector has emerged as a key development actor, as it has given a role in defining, pursuing, and financing development. With this, there is a need to ensure that private sector entities promote responsible business behavior in development cooperation by promoting accountability and by adhering to the development effectiveness principles alongside upholding the human rights-based approach. Now, in this context, CPDE's initiative on private sector engagement is twofold. The first one is monitoring existing private sector engagement projects through the Private Sector Watch, and also conducting outreach to social enterprises as potential partners in development cooperation through the action research on key actors in the social enterprises sector. Now, to provide us some more information regarding the work of CPDE on private sector engagement, let us welcome Matt Simons, who is the Senior Policy Officer and Liaison of the CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness. Over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Upakar. Hi, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, working back across the globe. Yeah, indeed. First of all, thanks to Tala and team for organizing this launch. We're quite excited to have completed this body of work, which hopefully is going to be very useful for all constituents in their work in terms of essentially ensuring the sustainable development impact of the private sector, to put it in constructive terms. Indeed, we've been working on this this area of work really since it became part of the a focus of the development community, and especially the development cooperation community, really focusing on private sector engagement supported by development cooperation. Of course, the private sector has been involved in development long before these international partnerships like the GPDC have started talking about it and promoting it really in a way that supports the implementation and realization of the SDGs. But let's say we've started to focus on really the discourse around private sector engagement within the context of these global global fora. So where do we start? Pull up just some notes here. Of course, we've been focusing on originally, let's say our focus as a CPD was really one of holding, I would say, reactive, and really focusing on holding the private sector to account, really ensuring that it upheld or respected human rights standards and labor standards and environmental standards. And I think more recently, we've taken a little bit more of a proactive approach in terms of promoting types of private sector that we think are best placed to contribute to the SDGs. So whether that's social enterprises or medium and small enterprises, really looking at it from a way where private sector can indeed be a partner towards leaving no one behind and realizing the development effectiveness agenda. We know, for example, just looking at what we focus on, that the resources and influence of the private sector do have a far-reaching impact. So there is a need to place the private sector within the framework of development cooperation. We've recognized that. We know that PSE through development cooperation aims to leverage the private sector to achieve development objectives, while at the same time recognizing the need for a financial return for the private sector. This has been a tricky one for CSOs to get behind, but indeed the private sector is profit driven, and that recognition by the global community is there. In pursuing the development and profit objectives simultaneously, we've said that there needs to be a place for civil society, but not just civil society, to monitor the private sector and its interventions, to ensure that it's effective, that it lives up to the development effectiveness principles, but also the broader human rights frameworks, the broader sustainable development agenda. So how and why do we monitor private sector engagements? Well, obviously to ensure that business interests are aligned with the development objectives, which is not necessarily always a given. To say that not all SDGs are given attention, but ensure that PSE covers a broad range of issues, so that naturally the private sector doesn't gravitate towards certain SDGs, and we need to try and sort of give a little bit of an added push to ensure that all SDGs are addressed where possible by the private sector. Because some of the private sector instruments that we see being used, for example, blended finance, are not really being mobilized where in countries that need it most, let's say. So focusing on low-income countries, we know that these types of private sector tools are not always mobilized in the places that are in most need. And then a final point, because MSMEs, we find, have difficulty accessing resources. It is the largest private sector force that has a profound impact on development, especially in the developing world. But when we talk about, let's say, private sector engagement through development cooperation, where the MSMEs aren't always at the forefront. And lastly, to ensure that the larger corporate sector, or MNCs, MNEs, and multinational, transnational corporations aren't able to exploit loopholes and skirt accountability. So the CPDE approach specifically is rooted very much in the Kampala principles. If you're not familiar, the Kampala principles is a set of principles designed by the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. I'm not sure whether Kim will speak to this later, but he was very much involved in this, in the development of these and the articulation of these. And it's now what we use really to inform our work and our positioning on the private sector, because by and large, they're quite comprehensive. I think they're quite balanced, quite neutral, and respond to the different priorities of the various development actors, especially at country level. We have a three-pronged approach, which is essentially advocating for government regulation, monitoring the private sector for accountability, and then financing MSMEs. That's kind of the overall approach that we have as CPDE. What do we consider success? Well, so far in our, let's say in our advocacy, it's really been focused on trying to establish accountability mechanisms and way to monitor business practices in terms of their application of the development effectiveness principles, and really now focusing on the implementation of the Kampala principles. We also are looking at sort of whether or not we see accountability mechanisms set in place at the country level around the regulation of the private sector in line with sort of national development priorities and the SDGs. And then finally, whether or not we see an uptick of the participation of local private sector, local economic actors in policy dialogue at the local level. I think, I think that I don't think I need to go into the rationale for the Private Sector Watch initiative, but essentially it was envisioned to be a repository of information on monitoring the private sector and to pull together various case studies and research from CPDE and its our partners from all across the globe, and really be an online hub and resource for use, you know, in all of our different kind of activities, initiatives, and interventions. I should also add that we have developed a handbook, which we launched about a year ago, for monitoring PSE and development cooperation. And again, this is really grounded on the Kampala principles and that framework, but it's about how CSOs at country level can use the Kampala principles to monitor the private sector in sort of the day-to-day activities, and essentially ensure that business is contributing to sustainable development. I would finally end on the point that the GPDC itself has put together various toolkits for the different actors on how the Kampala principles can be used. And I think those are going to be launched at the upcoming Effectiveness Summit, which is taking place in just about 2 weeks' time, a little less than 2 weeks' time. So with that, I hope that gives a sort of good sense of where we are in terms of our rationale for engaging on this topic. We do have a set of key asks turning to the Effectiveness Summit. I think hopefully everyone is aware that the third high-level meeting of the GPDC is taking place in 12 to 14 December in Geneva. There, CPD has prepared a broad set of messages or asks of what we expect or hope to see out of the summit. And one of our asks, as it's one of our strategic priorities and our main objectives, is around private sector accountability. And we've tailored some of these asks specifically to what we expect from the private sector, really putting people and planet and peace really over profit. There's two asks. I won't go through them. You will be able to see them. I think we've circulated them before or after this meeting, but really looking at, implementing the Kampala principles, respecting human rights standards, promoting decent work, social dialogue, and then assuring accountability and transparency of private sector activities, and then also looking at promotion of promotion of social enterprises, small and medium enterprises, and really looking at how we can support the types of private sector that are in most need of, let's say, development cooperation resources. With that, back to you, Upakar, and sorry that took longer than probably was supposed to.
Thank you so much, Matt, and it's absolutely all right. Thank you so much for providing us an overview of CPD's approach to private sector engagement, and also shedding light on the sustainable development impact of private sector and the situationer on private sector engagement, alongside the introduction of Global Synthesis Report and Online Hub. As Matt said, the key asks were presented and developed by CPDE and then enriched by the key findings from the case studies of the Private Sector Watch. Now, in order to present the key findings of the Private Sector Watch Global Synthesis Report, I would like to call upon Larissa May Suarez, who's the consultant of the report. Larissa is an assistant professor at the College of Arts of Letters at University of Philippines, Diliman. She has worked with the labor group Kilusang Mayo Uno and other people's organizations on campaigns to uphold human rights. She's also on the board of trustees of the Indigenous Peoples Movement for Self-Determination and Liberation. May I welcome you, Larissa?
Hi, thank you. So, could the slides be shared for the presentation, or should I just discuss them? Could I ask Tala of ROA?
Yes. Please go ahead. We'll be sharing the presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Tala. Okay, so is the presentation being shared already?
Not yet. Just a second, just a second.
You can refer to my screen, view as, and then look at the screen of the Reality of Eight network.
Sorry. How
View as, the upper.
view as?
All right. Wait, we'll try to share again. I'm so sorry.
Ayan, view as ROA. Okay.
Yes. Is it showing?
Yes, I think this is the first slide. Thank you, Anat.
Yes.
Sige, go ahead. Could you click to the next slide, please?
It's sharing. Can you see it? The main screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Sige,
All right.
All right. So for the private sector watch, okay, so I'd like to begin by adding a little bit more to the background of the project that was already shared by the earlier speakers. So this was a project that was spearheaded by the CPDE Task Force on Private Sector Engagement, led by ROA. So as noted earlier, it's a compilation of research. So this began in May 2021 and it was finished earlier this year. So this was conducted at the country level, at the national and the subnational level. So you can see, if you have downloaded the file shared in the chat, that this report was presented as a series of case studies from CPDE implementing units, and it's intended to be part of an online repository of information for PSE monitoring. Next slide, please. Tala, could you move to the next slide? Okay, so these are some of the okay, so bumalik sa sorry. So we return to the outline from the key points. All right, so I'd like to share very briefly the outline of the whole final project. The starting point really was the case study. So we began with these 8 articles that were written by the participating units. So these projects discussed specific initiatives between private sector entities and governments through the modalities of finance, capacity development, technical assistance, etc. What we found once we compiled those studies was that the highlighted topics centered around renewable energy projects, labor sector development, and analysis concerns about the legitimization of PSE shortcomings in various engagements between the private sector and the government at the national level. So after we had gathered all of those case studies, we worked together to prepare an introduction that summarized everything, highlighted the key points, and then prepared a conclusion and a series of recommendations to add to what was already recommended by the articles themselves. Okay, so these are some of the key points that I'd like to open with. Later on, the recommendations, the conclusion will be discussed in greater detail by other speakers. For now, some key points worth highlighting are the recognition of the limitations and challenges of the private sector as a development actor. So based not just on the projects that were specifically analyzed in those articles, but what was also included, background, context, so the impact of decades of PPPs and other PSEs, it was easy to identify these limitations. Another highlight of the project was the context-specific application of the SDGs under Agenda 2030 and the Kampala principles for effective private sector engagement. So actually, just as the Kampala principles were fundamental to shaping the key asks at the beginning of this project, they were also the main guidelines used later on in formulating the final analysis. Okay. Okay, so another highlight was the inadequacies of the existing development framework. So while there were some positive developments noted in a few of the reports, in the majority of cases, the involvement of the private sector exacerbated instead of alleviated development problems. So at the country and sub-country level, these actors cited violations of human rights in the labor and other sectors, negative impacts on communities and the environment, unethical financial transactions, and so on. And of course, another point worth noting is the lack of coherence in the current ODA policies and the direction of development cooperation around the world, which could also be seen in the various reports submitted. Okay. So the conclusion is broader than this, but to take note of 2 points that can be used later on in the discussion. So first of all, there's clearly a need to engage the private sector, not just for the furtherance of economic development, but to uphold public interests and human rights. It can be seen in the case studies right now that with regard to these factors, the private sector sees themselves not as an active enabler of these aspects, but as someone who is only interested in the purely profit-driven or economic aspect. In that sense, the Kampala principles as non-binding guideposts for effective practices are clearly underutilized. So they have not been maximized in formulating development aims and monitoring the actions of PS entities. Okay, so I think that's it. So the rest of the paper, a more in-depth discussion, will be tackled by the next speakers. Thank you, Tala.
Thank you so much, Larissa, for presenting the key findings on context-specific application of SDGs and Kampala principles, alongside the limitations and challenges of private sector engagement. Let me now welcome Henry Morales Lopez, who's the Secretariat of the CPDE Latin America and the Caribbean Constituency, and the Director of Movimiento Zouk Kimpop, and who also contributed a case study to the Private Sector Watch. Welcome, Henry.
Bueno, gracias, buenos días a todos, todas, noches. Como ya se ha planteado, este proceso de ir concretando cuál podría ser nuestro seguimiento desde la AOED a un sector que no es que se vaya ya a sumar a los procesos como actor de desarrollo, sino ya son parte, vimos la importancia con este proceso de trabajar las diferentes experiencias en varios países, de establecer recomendaciones básicas que nos pudieran servir para dar seguimiento a un plan de acción, a un proceso ordenado de trabajo por medio de varias recomendaciones. Para facilitar la traducción, intentaré ser bastante concreto, tal y como está establecido en el documento que tenemos, las recomendaciones. Un elemento sumamente importante, vemos, es el rol que tienen que jugar tanto los gobiernos y los socios del sector privado para poner fin inmediatamente a las acciones de desarrollo insostenible que perjudican a las personas y al medio ambiente. Nos parece sumamente importante esta recomendación, partiendo que el sector privado, en nuestra dinámica tradicional en nuestros países, en su práctica es parte de un problema que tenemos, ¿sí? Sobre todo la gran empresa, la empresa transnacional, que efectivamente ponen en riesgo no solo la sostenibilidad ambiental, sino la vida misma de las personas. Aquí se tiene que trabajar fuertemente para que este desarrollo insostenible pare como una primera conclusión a trabajar. Un segundo elemento es que los gobiernos deben mejorar sus mecanismos de control, regulación y rendición de cuentas de la participación del sector privado, para garantizar la adhesión de este a los principios de Kampala. Esto nos parece sumamente estratégico. Si los gobiernos no generan las condiciones básicas para efectivamente garantizar que el trabajo del sector privado se sume a esta serie de medidas que ya los principios de Kampala establecen, va a ser sumamente difícil poder tener un control y una posibilidad de seguimiento y de acción con el sector privado con relación a lo que está realizando. La siguiente, por favor. Una tercera conclusión es que los gobiernos también deben cumplir su mandato de proporcionar bienes y servicios básicos y garantizar la protección social de su población. Como lo plantea esta recomendación, es sumamente necesario que en los países se pueda tener la suficiente capacidad de políticas públicas adecuadas para resolver todos los problemas que las poblaciones viven. Y en este sentido, los gobiernos deberían proporcionar estos servicios básicos para que efectivamente el desarrollo que se pueda generar pueda estar inmerso en una posibilidad de sostenibilidad y de bienestar para todos y todas. Una cuarta recomendación va orientado a que los socios de desarrollo deben garantizar asociaciones inclusivas mediante el establecimiento de plataformas sólidas para diálogos y consultas genuinas con todas las partes interesadas, a fin de hacer frente al predominio del sector privado en los proyectos, orientados lógicamente a generar desarrollo y sostenibilidad en nuestros países. Esto es importante porque la mayoría de casos manifiesta que hace falta mecanismos de encuentro, mecanismos donde se pueda trabajar un espacio de reflexión, de análisis, de debate y de propuestas en términos de ir garantizando que estas participaciones inclusivas efectivamente puedan ser una realidad. Y fundamentalmente eso, es eso, que en estos espacios las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, las comunidades, los territorios, las poblaciones que en esta dinámica puedan salir afectadas, tienen que estar participando, aportando y lógicamente denunciando cuando así corresponda a las malas prácticas que se puedan generar. Pero hay que crear las condiciones y en eso hay que trabajar intensamente. Otra de las conclusiones es dar prioridad a las micro, pequeñas y medianas empresas y a los empresarios locales que tengan en cuenta las cuestiones de género como socios del sector privado en la utilización de las finanzas públicas. Esta recomendación es sumamente importante, partiendo que hay experiencias en donde la economía social, solidaria, popular, están tomando auge como una alternativa al modelo neoliberal o a las prácticas económicas que se tienen en los países. Pero hay que generar condiciones para que estas pequeñas o medianas empresas sociales, cooperativas, participen. Generalmente en la dinámica que tenemos en la actualidad, quienes están participando del sector privado son las grandes empresas, las transnacionales, pues porque tienen capacidades instaladas, pero no las que nos interesaría que participen por su dinámica fundamentalmente social y comprometida, lógicamente, a otro tipo de bienestar más allá de lo económico. La sexta recomendación, las entidades del sector privado deben adoptar y adherirse a las directrices acordadas internacionalmente y a las normas vinculantes a llevar a cabo, tanto sus actividades empresariales como sus iniciativas de desarrollo. De igual manera, ¿no? Esta recomendación tiene que estar orientada precisamente para que el sector privado se comprometa con estas directrices internacionales que en la cotidianidad no necesariamente son aplicados desde este sector. Y la última recomendación que se hace desde la OED es que los gobiernos deben apoyar a las organizaciones de la sociedad civil para que mejoren sus capacidades de seguimiento, medición y difusión de los resultados e impactos de la participación del sector privado. Nos parece que este es un elemento sumamente importante, partiendo que efectivamente en la realidad actual las organizaciones sociales tienen dificultades para entablar diálogos, no solo con el sector privado, sino con los gobiernos y otros actores. Sumamente importante generar condiciones y para ello hay que trabajar. En esa misma medida, es importantísimo que los principios de Kampala, que son como una base para poder hacer este trabajo de seguimiento, se tienen que conocer. En la actualidad no se conocen y eso es parte de las prioridades que desde las organizaciones tendríamos que comenzar a trabajar desde ya. Bueno, en síntesis, estas son las recomendaciones que se hacen y que de alguna manera recogen pues el sentir que tenemos en cada país para poder dar seguimiento a este sector que por sí solo pues tiene grandes posibilidades siempre y cuando pues, regulen su quehacer por medio de los principios de Kampala como una base inicial. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Henry, for sharing those valuable recommendations. The case studies in the Global Synthesis report are also uploaded in the Private Sector Watch online hub. It can be accessed through the link that has been sent in the chat box. So you can have a look at the Global Synthesis report there and the case studies. This online hub is an online repository of information on private sector engagement in development cooperation. And now, in order to show you how it's used, we'll be showing you a video to walk you through the online hub. So can we have the video, please?
However, the profit-seeking nature of businesses can present a conflict with development objectives and actors. Because of this, regular monitoring by civil society organizations is necessary. CSOs can keep track of private sector engagements and ensure the welfare of communities and the protection of the environment. The Private Sector Watch is initiated by the CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness and the Reality of Aid Network. It aims to monitor and assess private sector engagement in different country contexts. What is the Private Sector Watch? The Private Sector Watch is an online repository of information featuring specific initiatives where private sector entities are partnering with governments and other development actors for development outcomes. Case studies come from CPDE implementing units from across the globe. As a CSO database, the Private Sector Watch aims to monitor effectiveness of private sector engagement or PSE in development cooperation. Assess private sector entities' adherence to the Kampala principles. Provide evidence for CSO advocacies and policy recommendations on private sector engagement. Strengthen capacities of CSOs in monitoring and appraising the effectiveness of private sector engagement in their own contexts. Explore the Private Sector Watch. Zoom in on the map and look into specific projects. The colored pins designate the kind of private sector entity engaged. Green for social enterprises, yellow for multinational corporations, orange for large domestic corporations, blue for both multinational and domestic corporations. To know more about a specific project, click on the pin and a pop-up will open. The pop-up will provide a glimpse on the development project. Still curious? Click the Show Details button to reveal the project profile. The project profile will show a link to the full research of the project and the details on the project's financing, sector, modality, partners, Kampala Principles Assessment, impact on specific sectors. Looking for a specific project? Use the search function or filters for kind of private sector engaged, location of the project, range of financing, sector of the project, concerned population. For more information, refer to the Research and Handbook on Private Sector Engagement in Development Cooperation. Know more about the work of the CPDE Private Sector Engagement Task Force by going to www.csopartnership.org and www.realityofaid.org.
Wow. We hope that the video was useful in helping you navigate through the Private Sector Watch online hub. This video will also be uploaded in CPDE and Reality of AIDS social media handles. So please follow us on social media if you haven't already. Now, in order to discuss the purpose, aims, and the use of the online hub to CSOs, let us welcome Jiten Yunam. Jiten is the co-chair of the CPDE Indigenous Peoples Constituency and the secretary of the Center for Research and Advocacy Manipur. So welcome, Jiten.
Thank you very much, Upakar, and thanks and it's really nice that the Global Synthesis report is finally out, and also thanks for introducing to the online hub, private sector Watch online hub as well, and this is really important and timely as well. And I would reflect on some of the importance and also the necessity of having this online hub, especially for the civil society and also even for other development actors as well. The online hub and also the Global Synthesis report, it already provides, is also shared by many of our previous presenters on the application and also the challenges in the application of the Kampala principles. And the case studies already highlight the different challenges in the application of Kampala principles. Say, for example, the issues of the country ownership, inclusive ownership, transparency, or upholding accountability, for example. And there are concrete examples and concrete evidence as to how the Kampala principles are undermined, and which means there is tremendous areas for improvement by the private sector and other stakeholders. And the most important aspect of the private sector online, private sector watch online hub, and also this global industry report, is it also provides a very strong evidence, as to how the private sector focus in the development process by the government and other development stakeholders like the IFI, DFIs, development finance institutions, how it actually impact on the communities, how it impact on the environment, how it also impact how we also undermine the development results, for example. And there are multiple concerns. It's also highlighted by Henry Morales on how the private sector, overt focus on private sector can also lead to multiple harm on the people, on the environment, and hence the need for advocating, and hence the need for upholding accountability in these different aspects. And we also need to highlight the challenges with the private sector. For example, the corporate bodies, the private sector, it insists on seeking profits, and in that process, it negates and also it undermines the the need for upholding or promoting social infrastructure, and or the need to promote the socioeconomic benefits to the communities, because of their interventions. And I think this is one concrete area that we that the report and also the hub clearly can further identify, and this kind of evidence, the neglect of social infrastructure, the corporate bodies insisting on profit, and also the failure to include those communities who are affected, by several private sector involved projects. And I think these evidence are extremely important to push the government and also the private sector to ensure respect of human rights, and also for ensuring accountability in their engagement. And also this report and also this initiative is also important because this can also help in forwarding and promoting policy recommendations. Indeed, Henry also highlighted a series of recommendations, but then I would also emphasize some of the key recommendations that that we need to promote. That the private sector engagement need to align with the Kampala principles and other development and progressive human rights standards. It should recognize the rights of the communities, all communities and other stakeholders. And of course, to promote social enterprise as partners for development cooperation. I think this is extremely important. And this is all the more important. Why? Because there has been an increased focus of the government, of development financial institutions, bilateral donors that continue to advance the private sector role in development process now, and increasingly promoting enabling environment for the private sector, while there is a shrinking space for the civil society. So so we really need to forward advocacy and policy recommendations to ensure that the inclusive partnership is fully upheld, and also other Kampala principles are fully upheld. And this will also help in strengthening the capacities of civil society in monitoring and the effectiveness of private sector engagement, and also apprising the challenges of the private sector engagement as well. And the report will also facilitate dialogue, because we already have enough evidence, and also there will be evidence coming up through the hub, through the online hub. And this will also facilitate peer learning among development actors, the government, the civil society, the private sector, and even the DFIs who are involved in promoting private sector. And this will also complement the initiative of other development stakeholders, to promote the adherence to Kampala principles. And finally, I would insist that the private sector engagement involvement in development can be more effective by improving its performance on on promoting development, democratic ownership, human rights, and strengthen its accountability. And this report and also the private sector hub will contribute majorly in pushing forward the government and also the private sector in ensuring more accountability and more stronger adherence to the Kampala principles. And with that, I would insist that let's explore further the private sector watch, the online hub, the report, the case studies in particular, and let's apply in our own advocacy, in our own research, and in our own campaign for accountability of the private sector. And with this, I would like to thank everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jiten, for your insights and suggestions. We hope that the report and the online hub, as you said, will be helpful to our fellow CSOs in exacting accountability from private sector entities. And we also hope that the Private Sector Watch initiative will be useful to other development actors, such as governments, private sector entities, and multilateral institutions. We now have a panel reactor to provide insight and feedback on what we have presented today. Please allow me to welcome Kim Becher, the Director of Policy and Program Learning of the Center of International Private Enterprise. His department facilitates the international exchange of good practice, lessons learned, and policy options for democratic and market transitions. He also sits in the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation's Action Area 2.1 on private sector engagement. A very warm welcome, Kim.
Thank you very much for the invitation to join you today. I'd like to start by commending CPDE for using the Kampala principles in this pioneering report, and I hope that others will follow that lead in using the principles. That's my number one message. Use the principles. A couple of explanations about the principles. First, they're quite new, adopted in 2019 at the United Nations. So most of the case material you see in the report will be about histories that predate the principles themselves. And there's an effort to kind of apply the principles retroactively, which is something I've done myself in other GPEDC case studies. So just be aware that the principles are new, and I think it's therefore premature where the report says that the Kampala principles have been used to legitimize harmful actions of the private sector. I don't think the problem is how the principles have been used. I think the problem is that we need to start using them. And the other point is that the principles are really designed to be used in partnerships. They're not only a standard for the private sector to meet, but they're a holistic view at how different actors work together. And they've been endorsed and embraced by all the main stakeholder groups. On the roles of the different actors, I won't go into detail on the contributions of the private sector to development. They're acknowledged in the report. If you want additional evidence on how the private sector reduces poverty, take a look at Donor Committee for Enterprise Development evidence base, for example. The private sector is here to stay. You know, it's needed for jobs, for growth, for contributions to sustainability, innovation. The question really is, how can the private sector be a better partner? What are the rules of the game around engagement? How do we protect human rights? And how do we find the terms to work together in partnerships? There are places in the report where there seems to be lamenting the dependence on private sector investment. And I would say, like, don't turn away investment. Think about the quality of investment that a country wants to attract and how you get that. Where are the development partners? Obviously, development partners are key contributor to development cooperation. Some of the case studies in the report don't mention their role as far as I can see. It's not always easy to get their part of the story. I faced the same challenge myself, but they're really critical to understand their role and how that relates to the private sector. Are these development cooperation stories we're always talking about? And how can development partners be proactive in getting the policy frameworks and the principles in place? Government, I don't have a lot of time here, so I'll just underscore that government has responsibility in protecting the enabling environment for both civil society and business. And civil society's role, of course, you're talking about monitoring and watchdog rules, which are absolutely essential. And I want to see more from civil society as a partner. And I love what Matt said about being proactive rather than reactive. I was putting together a panel last month with business and civil society. How do we work together? And interesting examples around fighting corruption, helping refugees, promoting youth employment. So there are ways that we can work together as partners. Finally, what is the way forward? First of all, let's not look at partnerships, cooperation as a zero-sum game. I really love how we've moved towards more whole of society approaches. It's not just about the development partners or the governments, it's about how all the actors work together. I do absolutely agree in lifting up the MSEs, the entrepreneurs, the women in business. This is what CIPE does day to day. This is my job, is helping the domestic business in developing and emerging markets. So we need to work on common visions for development, especially at the country level. And getting incentives right is obviously key here. Profit is actually an indicator that in a competitive setting is an indicator that a business is solving a problem, meeting a demand, and has the means and the incentive to reinvest. So it's not contrary to development, but in the context of development cooperation, understand that your at least your best allies in this space will be companies that are contributing resources. They're thinking longer range about developing new markets, improving the environments in which they operate. And the reason development partners should be bringing them in is to amplify resources, not to reduce resources. So Kampala principle number 2 is all about getting this alignment of profit and purpose, and that is important. What is the specific business case and the specific development case? I want to appeal to you in your monitoring. Take a look at the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, where they offer an opportunity for companies to respond to grievances and accusations. I think it'll be a way of having fresher debate and credibility of your site to allow the responses. And really my most important point is the one that I started with, which is use the Kampala principles, get to know them, check out the case studies that I co-produced for the GPEDC. And let's take the Kampala principles as
Hello, Kim?
I think Kim froze.
Yeah.
Hello, Kim.
Seems like there's some kind of a network issue, but we really appreciate Kim's feedbacks and insights. We hope that he gets reconnected again, but we would like to thank him for his practical remarks, and we will definitely incorporate Kim's suggestions in our line of work in days to come. So thank you so much. So actually, we were planning to organize an open discussion forum now, but because of the limited time, unfortunately, we'll not be able to have it. But we really appreciate, we really value and respect all of your insights, questions, and queries. So if you have any queries, any feedbacks, any remarks, any suggestions, any questions, please direct them to the email ID that I just sent in the chat box, and we will get back to you immediately on it. And thank you so much. So for now, we will wrap up today's launch. And to end, let us welcome Vitalis Mia, who is the non-executive co-chair of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, and also the executive director of Reality of Aid Africa, to give the closing remarks. Hello, Vitalis, welcome.
I thank you very much. I'm in a very dark place, so you might not see my face. And I do not want to risk. So mine, again, along the lines of Kim, is really to congratulate CPD for a job very well done. As you know, as GPDC, we're still struggling with the monitoring reforms. And not a lot has come out of that in terms of data because we haven't rolled it out yet. But I think this gives us a very good indication of where things are going to go. And indeed, in the monitoring framework, we envision a process of collecting data using supplementary mechanisms. And I really want to encourage CPD to continue this line of work to ensure that we are collecting very relevant data. Second thing is really to also say that it is really great that we are able to collect this material and deposit it in one hub. But I think also it's really to be able to translate these findings into real national dialogue, real country action dialogue, where we are able to have a practical discussion with solutions for governments and private sector to really address the challenges that are emerging from engagement in development, not just for purposes of dialogue, but really being able to understand, assess, and provide real feedback on development impact the private sector is having. I think going forward to really be very with governments on this at the national level, but primarily for me, it's really civil society being the core and the voice for the voiceless on this debate. And that means really emphasizing on those elements that even Kampala principle has not captured well. That is giving, focusing on the elements that do with, uh, those that promote fundamental human rights, enhancing voices of communities to participate and be consulted in designing, implementation, and indeed assessment of the program. So I'm very grateful to this, and I want also to encourage us to have this dialogue also with private sector themselves. And I think this is a good step to go. And I hope that in future we can really have a physical dialogue on some of these findings and really collaborate with the likes of Kim to ensure that we have a dialogue on these findings with private sector and also global institutions that support them and chart a way forward on how we can improve development. So I thank you very much again and really congratulate you for a job well done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vitalis, for the closing remarks. We will be sending the link to the Private Sector Watch Global Synthesis Report and online hub to all the participants, and we'll also be posting them on our social media handles. And we hope that you can continue to support the work of CPDE Private Sector Engagement Task Force. As I mentioned earlier, if there are any queries, any comments, any suggestions, please feel free to send us an email on the email ID that has been posted on the chat box. And thank you so much, for sparing your valuable time and attending this launch. Your participation makes it even more special. And we look forward to your incessant and relentless support in days to come as well. And we hope to see you soon. So thank you so much. Tala, is there anything that you'd like to add?
No, I'm fine. Just thanks everyone for coming, and maybe we can get a group picture of all those who attended. Just a quick one before we all go our separate ways. So if you can turn on your videos. Thanks everyone. Wait. All right. 1, 2, 3, smile.